Buenos días a todos, este es nuestro segundo webinar de esta jornada. Esta mañana conmemoramos esta fiesta patria tan importante del el paso a la inmortalidad del general Manuel Belgrano y revisamos su figura acompañados por el historiador Eduardo Lázari. Y este segundo webinar lo llevamos adelante porque en estos días tenemos en nuestra ciudad y en nuestro colegio una visita muy especial, que es una familia de origen río tercerense que actualmente, desde hace muchos años, viven en Estados Unidos, en Texas, ¿verdad? Sí, en Texas. Entonces, le damos la bienvenida a Ruth Ruggero Hughs, que nos acompaña. Estos días sus hijos, Sofía y Hudson, han estado participando de las clases de nuestro instituto, compartiendo con nuestros estudiantes fundamentalmente en inglés, que es una experiencia para nosotros muy enriquecedora porque este tipo de intercambio nos ayudan a nuestros estudiantes a que pongan en ejercitación el idioma inglés, que es el idioma uno de los idiomas que aprendemos en nuestro instituto. Y hemos invitado, como el año pasado, a Ruth para que nos comparta algunos temas de algunas situaciones sociales, políticas, económicas de Estados Unidos. Así que, bueno, Ruth, te agradecemos, te damos la más cordial de las bienvenidas y, bueno, estamos a disposición para escucharte. Si hay preguntas, si hay cuestiones que alguno de los chicos quieran compartir o preguntar, intervenir, el micrófono está abierto también. Así que bienvenida, muchas gracias. Te recibimos con un aplauso, Ruth.
Hola, buenos días. Yo soy Ruth Ruggero Hughs, vivo en Austin, Texas. Hola, Valen. Me acuerdo haberte visto el año pasado y sé que vamos a practicar inglés hoy, ¿sí? Por suerte, Hudson y Sofía lo han estado practicando. Take pictures, not video. Okay. Les quiero agradecer por la bienvenida que les dieron. Le pedí a Sofía que saque fotos y creo que está sacando video o usando mi teléfono para otras cosas. Seguro que nadie acá haría eso, ¿no? ¿Quién no me entiende si hablo en inglés? ¿Alguien? Bueno, voy a cambiar, pero si tienen alguna pregunta, realmente, aunque yo estoy acá en este escenario, me encantaría que fuera más informal y que se sintieran cómodos haciendo cualquier pregunta que quieran. ¿Quiénes estaban aquí el año pasado cuando presenté? La mayoría. Bueno, y volvieron, gracias. ¿Y se acuerdan de algo que hablamos? ¿Eran de elecciones o de pandemia? Bueno, voy a tratar de cambiar del tema. Y también les presento a mi madre que está acá, Beatriz Mosca Ruggero, y vamos a empezar con los dos invitados que han tratado también, Sofía and Hudson Hughs. Can you please stand up and introduce yourselves and tell them what grade you're in and what school you go to? Right. Y cuando ellos dicen, when they say freshman and senior, do you know what that means equivalent here? No? Okay, so here, your school, primary, elementary, goes until what grade? 6, okay. It goes to 6 as well in the United States where we live. And then we have middle school, 7 to 9. So for you, that's 1 to 3? Okay, and then from middle school, you start high school with the big kids, and that's 10, 11, and 12. No, actually now it's 9, 10, 11, and 12. So now that's, 3, 4, 5, and 6, like all of you. And you start driving in Texas when you are 16. Does anyone here drive? Okay. In Rio Tercero, I learned it's faster to walk because there is nowhere to park. If you try to go to the centro, we can't leave the car anywhere. So it's better to walk and better exercise. So in the United States, we don't walk enough. So Sophia will be starting her last year of high school, and Hudson will be starting his first year of high school. And they switch from room to room for the classes, and everyone has a different curriculum with a focus sometimes on the things that are the most interesting to them. So we mentioned talking about the United States, but I will probably talk more about Texas, where we live. Do any of you know where Texas is? Yes? Maybe? In the middle of the United States, right next to Mexico. It comes down like this. Many people think Texas, we have cowboy hats and boots and horses, and the men wear suits with cowboy boots. That is true. And some do have, of course, many ranches and hats and boots, but we are also very modern. Texas is a state of more than 30 million people. So very, very big. If we were our own country, and we once were, we were under the flag of France and Spain, then we were a part of Mexico, then we gained independence from Mexico, we were our own country, a republic, and some people in Texas still think that we are our own country compared to the rest of the United States. And then, of course, being a part of the United States, we have different philosophies sometimes than the rest of the country. And I thought explaining a little of that history will tie in with some of the things that I thought we could talk about regard to climate conversations that are happening, medio ambiente conversations that are happening now, and technology, which is changing the world for all of us and certainly for all of you. So one thing about the history of Texas, well, today you're celebrating your flag, right? The flag, yes. And why do you celebrate today? I heard you had a wonderful speaker. What did you learn? Did someone learn something new today? You knew everything already? Uh-huh. Okay. So do you know why you celebrate the flag next week? Not just to have a day off. Well, I think that there's that sense of pride that we find that Texans have too, about celebrating things that people fought that came before us, very hard for us to have the freedoms and the opportunities that we have. So in Texas, I wanted to share that when we were a part of the United States in 1901, I wasn't born yet, but in 1901, we discovered spindletop. So it was oil from the ground. There's a movie, an old movie, black and white in English. It's called Giant, with old actors, Elizabeth Taylor, who is it, Rock Hudson, and Dean Martin. And no, it wasn't Dean Martin. Who's the other Dean that died young? Anyhow. But it's the movie of, you had the aristocrats and you had people who had land from Spain and France and Mexico, and they were very educated. And then you had the people that were out in oil fields trying to find oil and not finding anything, day after day after day after day for many years. And one day, oil sprang from the ground. So then you have in Texas a combination of educated aristocrats and people that were, trying to find oil, that had low education and suddenly were very, very wealthy. And so that's sort of the dynamic of how Texas started to form and have this education, but also a very important relationship with the oil and gas and petroleum, everything that made Texas very rich. We have lots of resources. We share a border with Mexico. We were a part of Mexico. So really in Texas, you'll find many people who speak English who are part of many cultures, not just one. And all of you learning other languages will always serve you so well in being able to communicate with other people in other parts of the world. But the reason I mention the story of that is because the evolution of that was that once they had a lot of money, then they were able to start having more power. They funded Lyndon B. Johnson, for example, was the first president from Texas. So Texas started to have more political power. The grandson of one of the oil and gas people, Lamar Hunt, he bought the Dallas Cowboys. So all of this culture started to arrive from all of this money that was created in a way that wasn't traditional, that wasn't inheritance, it was discovering it. And then we live today with an economy that, while in the 80s, everyone lost all of their money when there was an oil bust. And what we learned in Texas was that you have to diversify. Do you know what that word means? What does diversify mean? Someone tell me? Right, have different, not invest everything in one place, exactly. And so we have technology, we have a lot of other different areas now that we invest in. And we're very proud in Texas of our politics as well. Our politics in the United States, we have mostly a two-party system. You're either a Republican, which identifies the color red, so you'll hear people talk about a red state, and they have the elephant logo. And you have the Democrats with blue and the donkey. And generally speaking, Republicans believe more, I think, in capitalism and less government. And you decide how to spend your money, and competition and capitalism takes care of everyone. Democrats believe it's important for the government to help and to have more social programs. And those are the basic differences. It's more complicated than that. But were you aware that we have the two parties? Yes. Do you know what party Donald Trump belongs to? Yes. Yes. I think he belongs to the Trump party, but yes, he certainly ran as a Republican and is trying to run again as a Republican. And do you know who Joe Biden is? Right, he's a Democrat and he's the president. So, during the pandemic, the red states like Texas, we certainly followed the science and we followed the medicine, but we tried to open as soon as we could. So we had masks and social distancing, and they went to school. In California and New York, blue states, nobody went to school for 2 or 3 years. So during the pandemic, everybody moved to Texas, particularly Austin. There are many, many people that moved from California, from New York. They are states that are more expensive, and they were shut down, and so we had more and more migration. So while you may not have heard of Texas before, in the rest of the world, more people are looking at Texas more than New York and California, where they used to associate investing. And so, for example, Silicon Valley, Austin, Texas, where we live, in particular, is called Silicon Hills or Silicon Valley because everybody moves from Silicon. Once they've made their startup companies, they're starting to move to Austin. Elon Musk, have you heard of Elon Musk? Okay, what has he done? Do you know? What does he make? Yes, Hudson? Tesla. He makes a Tesla, right, electric vehicles. He also has another company trying to go to Mars in Texas called SpaceX. So he's working on that as well. And he moved from California to Texas to work on that. So I used to work in the government. We may have talked about it last year. I was the Secretary of State of Texas, but now I'm in private practice. I do government relations. So some of these things, I want to explain the culture to you because my work, even though I'm a lawyer, I do mostly government relations. So when companies are moving to Texas and they need help with the government, I try to explain the culture and make introductions so that you have that trust and credibility so that companies will have more opportunities in our state with resources available from our government and also just help with permits or licenses or different things that you need to start and run and grow a business in Texas. And I'm also the chair of the science fair. Do you have science fairs in Argentina? No? So we know that workforce and having the people to do the jobs of tomorrow is very important. So we don't have enough scientists and engineers. So we're trying to make more so that Elon Musk can build his cars and his spaceships. So we need more of everything, but we have a shortage. We don't have enough people for the jobs in that space. So we're trying to have more people that pursue science and engineering and trying to give more opportunities in that side of things. And now I will tell you, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the reason I mentioned science. We're going to talk a little bit again about climate change and about technology. Now, if you have questions, does anyone here like Taylor Swift? Oh, I say it wrong. Taylor Swift. ¿Así? ¿Alguien le gusta? Anyone? No? Okay. If you have questions about Taylor Swift, I have a Taylor Swift expert here. Now, does anyone like American football? No? So Hudson is going to start playing American football in 2 months. So if you don't see him again, that's why. No, he's going to do great. It's just all right, so I just have little notes to try to figure out what we were going to talk about now. So we mentioned that President Biden was president. So under President Biden in the United States right now, there's a very important program, and people call it ESG. What is ESG? It stands for Environmental, Social, Governance. Environmental, Social, Governance. But it's many words, so we say ESG. And the idea is that they want to force companies to get away from oil and gas that I mentioned is so important in Texas, to net zero, and to not have carbon emissions, and to save our planet. So those are all wonderful goals. But in Texas, we see it sometimes as an attack on fossil fuels. So we just have a different way of discussing renewables. In other places, they say, you know, oil and gas is bad, only renewables. Do you know what renewables mean? Okay, someone raise their hand and tell me. Oh, yes, sir. Yes. Can you define it in English? Anyone? Okay, at least we all understand each other. Renovables, exactly. And so people think California is very good about the environment, New York, but actually the cleanest state, the state that has the most wind farms and the most solar panels is Texas. So we don't talk about it because we care about all of our industries, but we actually have more investment than other states that talk about it a lot. And that's just something unique that most people, even in the United States or in other countries, don't always understand about how we do business. You know, we just make sure that all of our industries feel valued and important, but we continue to diversify and continue to look at investments in a lot of different areas. And the other thing about it is that, you know, the point of ESG is for companies to have policies. I had to look up the translation. What is policies? ¿Políticas? Ah, ¿qué palabra encontré yo, mamá? Formas. ¿Lo mismo? Okay. Because they're not rules, right? So it's like formas, politics, statements that say this is what we believe in. And they want companies to say, you know, we are going to make sure we have low emissions, efficiency, less pollution, less waste. We're managing our water. And I don't know if you learn about water, but water, you can live without oil, at least survive, right? Mostly. But you can't live without water. And we have a shortage of water with all of the demand of people moving and creating and building. I don't know if you have droughts here or water shortages, but it's a big problem in Texas. Right now it's very hot and it's not raining enough. So people your age, they're studying what to do about water and how to help and how to find other forms of energy. Or, you know, we're going to need more of that information. So we definitely continue to look at ways to help with the water shortages that we have, and figuring out ways to address the problems of the future. So that's just the background with Texas and with environmental issues. Are you learning about the environment in school? Yes, and what are and also when you learn about the United States, you think of all of the United States, right? Not Texas, right? Yeah, like if we learn about Argentina, they're not always learning about Cordoba, but different regions have different priorities. So Texas is so big, that's why I know the most about it. If it was its own country, it would be the 8th largest economy in the world. So, so that was some of the things that, do you learn about solar wind and other forms of energy? Yes? Do you have those types of energy here in Rio Tercero? No? No? Well, it may be developing over time. The problem with the wind is then it kills the birds, right? So it's challenging because you're trying to help, but then you also, usually nature is not adapted to these large forms of energy that we have that would help us. So that's a little bit about the environment. But I will also tell you, in the United States, how big are our trash bins, Sophia and Hudson? About your size. We have large trash bins. We make a lot of trash. Everything is disposable. And I actually learned, getting ready for this, the average American throws out 4.5 pounds, or about 2 kilos of trash a day, more than the rest of the world. So we have a lot of policies and discussions and requirements about the environment, but we have a lot of work to do with how we waste. The average Argentine throws away 0.86 kilos, so not so much. So the other thing I wanted to share with you is talking a little bit about technology. I don't know if you all have been discussing semiconductors in school at all, but during the pandemic, we learned that we are very, very dependent on Asia. And many things that we take for granted that were available to us were no longer in our shelves, or we couldn't get parts or cars or different things like that. And particularly toilet paper, of all things, but certainly chips that went into many of the items that we needed for our everyday living. They were made in Asia, and we couldn't get them here for the pandemic. So since the pandemic, there's a big emphasis on trying to make sure that we have access to items closer to home, that we manufacture and we make chip wafers closer to the United States. And we call it near shoring, so that you're shoring, moving things closer to the US. Or in Canada and Mexico in particular, they always emphasize the United States should really look at friend shoring, that they are our friends, they are countries that are friendly to us, and we should manufacture and create the things that we need that are essential in those countries rather than in China. So the federal government in the United States, under the senator from Texas, created the CHIPS Act. So at home, I think every day I hear the word, the CHIPS Act. And the CHIPS Act is the federal government going to give $200 billion to companies and research institutions in the United States so that we start to build the chips that we need for our phones, for our cars, for all of our machinery in the United States or near the United States, and that we also build a workforce to support that. I think most people don't know what the CHIPS Act stands for, and I know why, because it's long, but I will tell you, it stands for Creating Helpful Incentives to Produce Semiconductors Science Act of 2022. So you know the word creating, right? Do you know incentives, what that means? It's similar to Spanish. Yes. Does the government give incentives here for businesses to build or to start a company? No? No. Well, we want to make sure we encourage and we make it economical for people to manufacture in the United States. For example, a South Korean company invested in Austin. Do you know the name of the company? You too? Is there a company from South Korea in Austin, Texas now?
I have no idea.
Oh, come on. So Samsung invested $52 billion to come to Texas, and we want to make sure that they have the workers they need to do the work. So you have the technology, but then you need the workers to be able to produce. And so there's a lot of emphasis on the workforce and what that's going to look like. It also has a lot to do with our national security. So we consider it important to our national security to build inside the United States as much as possible. But also I think it's giving more opportunities to Latin American countries, in Argentina as well, because you're considered friendly to the United States and not hostile like, you know, Russia or China. So there's a lot of discussion around that, and I think we're seeing a change or an evolution in where work comes from. But the biggest thing is that with technology, how many of you have a phone? A smartphone? Do you have a phone? Yes, I know you do. Anyone else? Well, I'm glad it's not so many because, you know, the problem with the phone is it's an amazing piece of technology, but by design, it's addictive. And so it's created so you have these pings and you constantly want to answer and respond, and then it can be a distraction from living your life. And so it has actually created a national crisis in the United States among our youth, that they're depressed and they're anxious, and they have these conditions that not everyone had when I was growing up. So it's very important that you remember the technology was made for you to use it, not for it to control you or to use you or to decide when you will look at it because it speaks to you. You have to really keep that control of technology in your own hands. Does that make sense? Do any of you have trouble putting the phone down? No? Everyone's in control? Okay. Yep. Okay, very good. I'm glad to hear that. I also heard some of you are doing debate. Who's doing debate? Uh-huh. It's wonderful. Have you talked to Sophia about debate? No. So she's been doing debate. Her team was able to go to Berkeley, a very good university in California, to compete. And what I find unique about debate, and I mention it when I'm asking about your phones, is that you used to get information on the television or the radio collectively. You know, we would all sort of hear the same news and the same information. But with technology, you can always listen only to what you believe in. You never have to see the other side. And there's a term in psychology, maybe you two know the answer. Do you know what confirmation bias means? Sí, a vos te estoy hablando. Uh-huh. Confirmation bias, do you know what it means? No. Do you understand what I'm talking? Yes? Okay. A little bit? Am I speaking too fast? Okay. Okay. But I don't have an English accent. They speak so nicely. Has anyone heard the word confirmation bias? Yes? Who said yes? Ah, very good. ¿Qué quiere decir?
En español, sesgo de confirmación.
Claro. ¿Y cómo es la primera palabra?
Sesgo.
Sesgo. Ah, no conozco esa palabra. Bueno, voy aprendiendo también. Sesgo de confirmación. And that's the idea, that you only listen to what you believe in, and then you keep hearing what you believe in, and it gets repeated. So it becomes that you think you're right, and everyone else is wrong, and there is no other perspective. You know the word perspective? Very good. And so with debate is the only place that you have to be able to argue both sides, right? And it's such a gift because it's something that we're losing in our society. You must be able to argue both sides, which means you have to try to understand another point of view. And that is something else I want to leave you with today, that it's incredibly important to be open and curious about the world around you and try to understand that there are other points of view, which is why it's wonderful that you're learning other languages, because you're also learning other cultures and other communities and appreciating how other people think and what they say. Also about technology, when we were growing up, you might have an idea that you want to be a firefighter or a doctor or a lawyer, and people would start a job and they would do that job for 30 years. And maybe that will still happen here. I don't know what the job market looks like. But in the United States, what we have to tell our children now is that we shouldn't be asking them, what will you be when you grow up? The question is really, what will you be first? Because our world is changing so much faster than it ever changed for anyone until now. Technology is going so exponentially quickly, faster than as humans we can sometimes keep up, that you have to be adaptable. You have to continue to learn and adapt to your environment, adapt to the opportunities around you. And you may have more than one job, more than one career. You may be one thing first and then another, and you will have those opportunities. Now, it doesn't matter if you're sitting in Rio Tercero or in Manhattan, you can be behind a computer doing the same work. That's incredible. You can sell a product. In fact, there's a gentleman, he sold sponges. You know what sponges are? Esponjas. He bought them for 10 cents. He sold them for $1 on Amazon. He sold 3 million. Do you know how much money he made? About $3 million. I mean, so that's not everyone, but those are things that were never even possible before, to have access to the world that way. And so those are very, very exciting opportunities that will present themselves at some point in your lives. So I think that those were some of the main things I wanted to share with you, is just how valuable it is that you're learning another language, that you're learning about other communities, that you're learning about other cultures, and that you continue to stay curious and you continue to read. Sophia, how many books did you bring on this trip? 7. She brought 7. Now, I don't know what she's reading about. I'm not sure that I approve, but the point is, it's good exposure to read, to enter other worlds and learn different things. And so I really commend all of you for listening, for getting this education that your parents are providing to you. When you start college in the United States, you have to pay for it, and it's very, very expensive. It is an investment in your future. But it's very expensive, so not everyone does it. And then when you graduate, you're still not, you still don't have a doctorate. You can't be a lawyer or a doctor or any kind of PhD. You have to go to graduate school, which is another 3 or 4 years, and another payment, and another application, and another journey. So in Texas, we have a program called 60 by 30. And what that means is that in the state of Texas, the 30 million people in Texas, we're trying to have 60% of the population by the year 2030, which is coming up, have at least some kind of a certificate or degree beyond high school. Because we know the studies, the statistics show that with only a high school degree, you're very limited in the United States in your opportunities. But with education, you open many doors. My parents, my mother was a teacher, always valued education, and enforced that with all of us. And it really has been the key to many, many opportunities that have become available to myself and my 3 brothers because of taking the advantage of education. So I hope that you will all continue to study and stay curious and learn and adapt and use technology, but don't let it use you. Okay?
Can I ask you, where did you study?
Me?
Yes.
So when I was, how old was I, Mama? Cuando, no, cuando me secuestraron a Estados Unidos. Yeah. So for kindergarten, I was in Rochester, New York. And a pineapple?
Yeah, she took the pineapple, she wouldn't let the pineapple go,
Mm-hmm.
and never talked one word.
No. I never spoke. I think I started speaking English in 2nd grade, and then I haven't stopped, right? I haven't stopped speaking since then. No, but I mostly grew up in Corpus Christi, Texas, by the Gulf of Mexico in Texas, and in Rio Tercero in the summers, June to August. And then I went to the University of Texas in Austin. They are the Longhorns, but I'm not sure if that's a bad signal here. Is that a bad signal? Longhorns, UT? Anyway, but we're very proud of being Longhorns. And then I studied for law school at Rutgers University in New Jersey. And I lived in New Jersey and then Manhattan in New York for 13 years. And then after 9/11, I realized I lived far from my family, and I moved back to Texas in 2004, where I worked in government and worked for a gentleman who now is our governor, Governor Abbott, who has given me all of these opportunities. Interesting story about Governor Abbott, who runs a state that has more power than Russia, right? But he's in a wheelchair because after law school, after it rained one day, he went for a jog, and he was jogging and a tree just cracked and landed on his back. And I think most people might have thought that was the end of a career or much of a life. He spent a year in the hospital working very hard to get better. And then he started a life of public service as a lawyer. And so he became a judge. Then he became the attorney general. Do you know that word in Spanish? Procuraría? So he was that. And then he has been our governor now for 8 years. We don't have term limits for governors like we do for presidents. So he may run again in 2024. Unless he tries to run for president or something like that. But really, I wasn't expecting a career in politics in Texas, but I have this job where I met Governor Abbott and have had a relationship working under his administration since then. And now in private practice, still friendly and working closely with him, but trying to help companies when they need assistance. Yes, sir. Yes. Sure. What a wonderful question. Thank you for asking it. And it ties to my comment about Republicans and Democrats, Texas and California, and confirmation bias, right? So unfortunately, that is true. There is a lot of discourse. People are not here or here, they're here. And we used to, bipartisan, have you heard that word? Bipartisan means both parties agree. And there were basic things you could agree for the good of everyone. And now that is seen as negative. But without bipartisan support, you can't get anything done. And so we are struggling with that. And I hope that we will find a way to come together. I think, most people with children want a better future for their children, and regardless of the party, want to work towards that. I also think, being in politics, that sometimes the conversations that you hear on the news isn't always as bad as it sounds. Newspapers sell with a lot of conflict. And so sometimes I read stories about my own friends, and I say, well, that's not that's not what I think happened, right? Or so the good news is that there is a lot of work with a lot of people that care, that may not be what the papers cover, because it may not sell newspapers. For example, in Texas, we don't want to sound negative against fossil fuels and oil and gas, but we are working on renewables. We just don't say oil and gas is evil. California or liberals do. right? So I think it has to be that there's an opportunity to be able to support and add without necessarily making someone always the bad guy, but that doesn't always sell newspapers. And the other thing that makes me very hopeful, like, will that ever change? That depends on all of you. Your generation is going to have to figure out, the bad examples that you saw from us as adults, and whether you will act the same way, whether you will work together, whether you will, understand other points of view. So I still have hope, and I do know that there is a lot of coming together ultimately, but certainly you're right that because of all of the advancements in technology and becoming more isolated, it becomes more difficult sometimes to understand someone else's point of view, or even have to bother agreeing. You never have to see them. So those are the things that are really going to depend on our youth to make better choices maybe than we've made up until now. So now I have a question for you. Does Director Jimenez speak English? So Hudson thinks he does. He's committed. But I will believe all of you. So, and then, I guess in closing, I haven't been keeping an eye on the time, but you may have heard that you won the World Cup. So the whole world was talking about Argentina. I was so proud. And Messi worked so hard. It was very well earned. So I hope that you also enjoyed it. I would have loved to be here watching it and not in Dallas, Texas with my brother. But we were screaming so loudly, you might have heard us here. So congratulations. And that's another example of being ambassadors for your country, for your city, for your family. Every one of you are ambassadors, and you represent yourself and your family and your city and your province, and it goes from there, your school. And from what I've observed, even in this time here with you all, you're doing a wonderful job. So congratulations, and thank you for having me. Thank you. Any questions? Good? I am. Did anyone else have any questions besides this gentleman? No? Good? If you do, you can find us. We're easy to find. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. I have a presentation. Hudson and Sophia, will you bring that bag to me? Now, si no me entiende, le van a tener que traducir entonces. No, el año pasado y otra vez este año nos ha dado realmente el honor y el placer de que puedan tener esta experiencia cultural. Así que en Texas hemos volado la bandera de Texas sobre el Capitolio en honor a la escuela y a usted. Y esto dice que pero no era la fecha antes de viajar, así que no era la fecha fija. Y esto dice que está presentado el director Jiménez y el instituto de la familia Hughes y Ruggero y del estado de Texas y los representantes del Capitolio de Texas el 6 de junio 2023 para celebrar nuestra amistad y intercambio educativo. Así que fue esta bandera.
La bandera de Texas.
Sí, pero bueno, lo cual también es distinto porque en el resto de Estados Unidos todos, por supuesto, tenemos la bandera de Estados Unidos, pero también en Texas, siempre que vean la bandera de Estados Unidos van a ver la de Texas también. Y no que la tengan que colgar, pero fue esta que estuvo sobre el Capitolio. Si quieren mirar en el internet, el Capitolio de Texas es muy bonito. Bueno, gracias a ustedes por toda la atención. Realmente. Sí, lo voy a decir. A mi fotógrafo, mi teléfono. Aprendí que esta luz no los...
Bueno, muy bien, el Instituto Marcelino Champagnat entonces agradece enormemente este contacto, esta visita, estos gestos así como de fraternidad, y los esperamos el año que viene. Si vienen por acá, los esperamos de nuevo. Y tenemos pendiente la teleconferencia con algún colegio de Estados Unidos, como para ir intercambiando entre estos chicos y chicos de Estados Unidos. Tenemos eso pendiente. Ella ha estado trabajando sobre esto, pero bueno, tiene ahí tiene sus vueltas, entonces ya lo vamos a concretar. Así que bueno, muchísimas gracias, un abrazo enorme del Instituto Marcelino Champagnat para ustedes, y los conservamos aquí entre nosotros siempre. Gracias.